Hello and welcome to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. That would be me, your host, as always, with my cup of Pete's coffee. Oh, it doesn't look like it's properly sealed. Let's make sure. That would be very embarrassing if I went for that simultaneous sip and then it spilled on me. Okay, I think it is secured. Here we go, simultaneous sip. It is, as always, from the delightful Pete's Coffee, and I have the Cafe Americano with a little bit of room for cream and some honey, because we all need a little bit of sugar with our caffeine. Here we go, the simultaneous sip. Ah, so good, so good. Today's episode, the world's #1 anti-vaxxer, that would be me, on Trump's vaccine change. Yes, it has finally happened. 10 years after Trump first said that maybe vaccines are associated with rising cases of autism, he has finally done something. I submit this to those individuals who claim that Trump is a crazy man. I say Trump is not a crazy man. In fact, I've always argued that Trump is kind of like your responsible CEO. Now, do I think that's a good thing? Not in this case. And so I've got a lot of criticism for Trump that took him 10 years to do this. And I have detailed many of my problems with Trump and vaccines. You can read all about it in my book, Inoculated: How Science Lost Its Soul in Autism. In fact, there is the concluding chapter, which I believe, which was, I think this came out in 2018. Epilogue: Trump, Hope, and Reality. Meaning that for so long, there has been an enormous gap between what Trump said about vaccines and whether he did a single goddamn thing about it. Okay, this was published in 2021. So after Trump left the presidency, but actually it had been published in an earlier edition. It was picked up by Skyhorse, who republished it, and we added that section on Trump. So, on Trump and vaccines, I have long argued that Trump is best seen as Abe Lincoln with the slavery issue. Abe Lincoln famously said, "If I could preserve the Union by not releasing a single slave, I would. But if I had to, but I would also, if the only reason way to save the Union was to release all the slaves, I would." So Lincoln had strong opinions about slavery, but he didn't want to push those forward on the public. And I would argue that a careful reading of history shows that the southern states could not handle a president who criticized slavery as strongly as Lincoln did. I believe that if the southern states had not attacked at Fort Sumter, then I think that Lincoln would have let slavery continue. That was his stated position. That's come in for a lot of criticism of people over the years, and I think that's good criticism. I think Lincoln was saved because the South decided to attack, at least saved in the judgment of history. Trump, I'm not sure how Trump is going to be viewed by history. Will he be viewed as a crusading figure, or will he be portrayed as somebody who waited for the inevitable pressure to build up to take action? So, for those of you who remember the 2016 campaign, Trump very early on had said in a debate, which I believe was at the Reagan Library, that he had heard many stories from friends who he trusted that their children were normal before vaccination and were not normal afterwards. He also, at that time, expressed concern that children were being given too many doses of vaccines at a single visit. So, my question is, if you knew this in 2016, why in God's name did it take you until 2026 to do a goddamn thing about it? Well, I think it's because the big pharma lobby was really powerful. And the big pharma lobby had also poisoned the minds of too many of the citizens, not allowing Trump to take action. But like a good chief executive does, he learns what the problems are, and then he waits until his hand is forced by events. I kind of think that's the way Trump has acted with this vaccine issue. In the 2024 campaign, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. joined with Trump, creating the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement, to work in partnership with the Make America Great Again group. I thought this was a great strategic move, and actually, probably about 4 or 5 months before Robert Kennedy joined with Donald Trump, I was at a private event with Kennedy, talking privately with him, and I asked him whether he would ever consider hooking up with Donald Trump. At that time, Kennedy was still very much in the throes of the mainstream media view of Trump, and he said there was no way in hell he would ever do that. Now, Kennedy knew that I was kind of a Trump guy, and I did my best to persuade him that, when you find that there's an area of common cause with somebody, you might want to talk with them, even if you don't agree on everything. So, what I had said to Kennedy privately probably had zero effect, but I just want to put it on the record that several months before Kennedy did join with Trump, I was urging Kennedy to do the same thing. So let's talk about what Trump did and see if it corresponds to my idea about Trump as a good, responsible CEO. Now, the thing that drives Trump critics crazy is that Trump does a lot of his thinking out loud. Why does he do his thinking out loud? I think it's beta testing. He wants to say things and look for the reaction. I think that that's how he tests ideas. So he can say what appears to a lot of people to be crazy shit, but is really a good way of taking the temperature of the room. Very early in his first term, he had asked the question, what's the importance of NATO? Why do we have NATO? And at the time, many critics had pointed to that as an example of Trump not being serious. But as time has gone on, that's a really good question, which brings me back to one of my main points, which is there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you can't give a good answer to a supposedly stupid question, maybe the question isn't so stupid. Maybe the person who can't explain their point of view is actually the stupid one. So let's talk about Trump being a responsible CEO. So I am well aware that in this area, we really don't have any good data. In the absence of good data, people are falling back on their risk reward analysis. Many people, many good people, look at this area and they say, okay, I understand we don't have much information on the long-term consequences of vaccines, but for me, the risk-reward analysis says, take the shot. I can't really argue against that because that's a value judgment. That is a value judgment on how much those individuals trust the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical companies. There's no objective science on what level of trust is appropriate. However, what I would add to that analysis, and which makes me have a different risk-reward tolerance, is the understanding that in the 1980s, vaccines were hurting and killing a lot of kids, specifically the DTaP vaccine. In fact, they were getting sued so much that it was estimated by some sources that the pharmaceutical companies were looking at a liability which was 100-fold of their profits. So they have really screwed up. So what was the answer? So they went to Reagan and they said, what we need to do is we need absolute immunity from any financial harm, including lifelong injury or death from childhood vaccines. Reagan gave them that immunity, but there were also some support things in that which were not done. So there were some guardrails that Reagan had put onto that. One of the guardrails is that every 2 years, the pharmaceutical companies were supposed to report to Congress surveillance data on the safety of their vaccines. They have never done that. So those things make me have a very different risk-reward profile and tolerance. In my mind, if a company is trying to sell a product and you cannot sue them for injury or death, I will never take that product. Call me crazy, but if you're telling me there's no liability for the maker, I ain't taking your product. Got it? You can't remove civil liability from a product and then tell me I have to take it. What's even crazier is that school kids can't go to school without taking the goddamn shots, especially if you're in fucking California. Fucking California took away all of the exemptions. I don't have a clue as to why, except to say, California Democrats, you're a bunch of fascists, okay? That's not the point of view of a responsible CEO like President Trump is. What did the responsible CEO, President Trump, do, which will probably solve 90% of the problem and yet be easily defensible? So let me read from Breitbart News. So basically, what Trump did was, we currently get, under the CDC's schedule, children from the age of 0 to 18 will receive approximately 72 different doses of 17 vaccines. So that's 72 jabs before the age of 18, with a significant number of those jabs coming in the first year of life. One of the most controversial jabs is the hepatitis B vaccine, which children get on their first day of life. So got it? You come out, you get a shot. That's life in the United States. So what do we know about hepatitis B? We know that hepatitis B is a disease contracted by IV drug users and prostitutes. What do we know about the hepatitis B vaccine? It works for approximately 10 years. So that means if you are concerned that your newborn within the first 10 years of life will be an IV drug user or a promiscuous prostitute, you might want to give them a hepatitis B shot. However, if you think, maybe that protection should come a little bit later in life, well, they'll call you an anti-vaxxer. So what Trump did was he looked around the world and he saw that particularly in the European countries, many of them will only give 11 jabs before the age of 18. So these are Western European democracies. They have good health outcomes. They do not have the remarkably high number of children damaged with autism that we do. And so Trump, being a responsible CEO, says, why don't we take it down from 72 jabs to 11 jabs? Also, states like California, who have made it virtually impossible for parents to get a medical or religious exemption, should face increased scrutiny from the Department of Justice. Now, full disclaimer, I sit on the board of a group called Free Now, which is challenging the elimination of religious and medical exemptions in California. As you can imagine, I feel very strongly about this. You will notice that I refer to myself as the world's #1 anti-vaxxer. That is true. Nobody has given me that title. I've given it to myself. But you should probably know that my position that vaccines need to be looked at the way we look at any other pharmaceutical product has gotten me banned from the entire continent of Australia from 2017 to 2020. So let's review, shall we, how fucked up Australia is. So if I was a democratic socialist, let's say I was the mayor of New York City, for example, and I asked to go visit the great land of Australia, they would probably welcome me with open arms, although I believe in the destruction of the capitalist system. But me, a lowly science teacher and author who has some questions about vaccines, is banned from going to Australia as a threat to the political stability of the system. That is the actual language which was used in the Australian document that was sent to me, denying me the ability to go and speak in Australia. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that somebody who doesn't even believe in the capitalist and democratic system is fine to go to a Western democracy like Australia. But me, who simply says, hey, I don't think it's a good idea that a consumer product given to fucking children should have no fucking liability for the people who make it. I'm a threat to democracy. That makes no fucking sense to me. Maybe it does to you, but we may differ. Okay. So what caused Trump in his first term not to aggressively go after the vaccines? I mean, that's a pretty big problem, don't you think? He says very publicly, hey, people I know say that this product harmed their kids. That seems like a priority. Well, he started off pretty good. He said he wanted to get Robert Kennedy Jr. to head up a vaccine safety commission. He even brought him in. Kennedy met at least with Vice President Mike Pence, and some things got set up, but it fell apart. Why? Because of Anthony Fauci. And then Trump, because he's that responsible CEO, decided to have a meeting with Bill Gates. And as Bill Gates said later publicly, I told Trump that Robert Kennedy Vaccine Safety Commission was a bad idea. And I think that's why Trump didn't do it. Yes, that makes me very mad. I have always said that Trump is a rather cautious politician. And if I liken him to Lincoln, I liken myself to Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was constantly criticizing Lincoln for going too slow, for not immediately releasing an Emancipation Proclamation. And even in the Emancipation Proclamation itself, it did not get rid of slaves in the border states. Lincoln was being a responsible leader, knowing that he risked the loyalty of the border states if he moved too quickly. I understand that, but still, I got to criticize it. And so I think that Trump's order on vaccines is fantastic. It shows he hasn't forgotten us. It's coming really late, 10 years, okay? And I also think that there's another thing which is going on, which I think the Maha-MAGA alliance is fraying. The Maha moms and dads, don't forget, you need a dad for a kid. I know a lot of the dads hightailed it out of there when their kids had problems, but I didn't. So I'm going to keep saying Maha moms and dads. We've been waiting for this moment. This is good. It's not the end of the story. How can it be good when kids are still getting 11 jabs for which the pharmaceutical makers have zero liability? Hopefully, this starts the conversation. This conversation needs to happen. You cannot say that vaccines are safe and effective, and at the same time say that companies need to be completely shielded from any financial liability. That is just nutso. Please don't make arguments which are crazy. That is a crazy argument. Either you have to say vaccines are safe and effective, and they should be subject to the same product liability laws as every other product, or you must agree with me that product liability should be taken away from them. I don't understand why we're not having that conversation. The conversation And here's what I would say directly to President Trump. You need to make the argument that if these vaccines are safe and effective, the big pharma companies should be begging you to remove the liability shield. I don't understand how parents are so brain dead that they think it's a good idea to give their kids a liability-free product. In what universe does that make sense? I have lost friends and family and endured professional isolation because I raise what I think are really simple questions. If I went up to you and I said, please eat at my restaurant, but if it kills you, you can't sue me, you would never eat at my restaurant. If I said, please buy my car, but I don't know if it's safe, you wouldn't buy my car. Why is it that with the help of the American Medical Association and the American Pediatrics Association, and Big Pharma, that the American public, parents, you're so fucking brainwashed. How can you justify giving your child one jab when the companies who make it have zero liability? If you want to give a single child a jab, a medical intervention, you'd better have a really robust system of consumer protection. And I'd also like to say something which I know will even be more controversial. Every single pediatrician who gives a vaccine and harms a child should be prosecuted for that crime. I was a teacher for 20 years. If a student walked into my class and I punched them, I would have lost my job. Why is it any different for pediatricians to give shots which harm children, and why do they still receive a paycheck instead of being thrown in jail? Here's what I say. Every single pediatrician in America who is given a vaccine, in my mind, should be thrown in jail for at least 50 years for the harm that they have caused to children. I know this may be an extreme view. You're going to say to me, well, they've got a mortgage to pay. They've got kids to send to college. Well, I'm sure those concentration camp guards in Nazi prison camps had some of the same financial burdens. But if you harm children, I think you should burn in hell. If you harm children, I think you should go to prison for a long time. If you harm children, I've got no problem with your life being taken from you. These are our children. They depend on us. They look up to us. And we, as adults, have failed them. How did we ever get to this place where we think it's love and caring to give a medical product to a child for which the makers have zero financial liability? If this happened in any other sphere, there would be an uprising. There needs to be an uprising about the vaccine issue. I'm pretty confident that reducing the vaccines from 72 jabs to 11 will have an enormous impact on the number of children damaged. However, that number will still be more than zero. And that, to me, is not acceptable. So, am I happy that Trump, after 10 years, finally took this action? Yeah, I'm pretty happy. But I've endured more than 10 years of being ostracized. I first came to this fight in 2003. 2002, January of 2002. So I've been in this fight for nearly a quarter of a century. If Trump just had the balls to do what he said he was going to do in 2016, the world would look a lot different. If Trump had the balls to do what he should have done in 2016 with the vaccines, do you think COVID would have ever happened? No, because he would have forced everybody to take a closer look at what was going on in medicine and science. So, is this 10 years too late? Yeah. Is it better than nothing? Yeah. Is it better than anything that the Democrats would have done? Yeah. Is it better than any other Republican? Yeah. Does it still piss me off that it's taken so long? Yeah, it does. Okay, that's all I have for today. And as always, hopefully, this is not the best part of your day. Hopefully, the best part of your day is interacting with real people in the real world. All right, thanks a lot and have a good day. And don't take too long to do the right thing, because if you do, I'm going to tell you, you did it wrong.